You believe you are stuck because you do not have the right people behind you. You look at other men and assume they are ahead because someone pulled them into the room before they were ready. That story feels good. It protects your ego. It explains your position without demanding change. But comfort is expensive. The moment you blame your lack of access, you surrender your agency. You start waiting to be chosen instead of building something undeniable. Here is the reality most men avoid. If your rise depends on being invited, you are not rising. You are being transported. And whatever is transported can be set down. A man whose progress depends on someone else's approval is not sovereign. He is paused, watching faces, reading moods, hoping for generosity. That is not strategy. That is dependency dressed in confidence. A political realist would not call this bad luck. He would call it structural weakness. You constructed your ambition on ground you do not own. And the first rule of power is simple. Secure yourself in what you command, not in what others can withdraw. If you have no network, you are not doomed. You are unattached. You are not woven into obligation. You are not chained to invisible favors. That absence is not a curse. It is raw material. Most men never experience it. You have the rare opportunity to build strength that is not leased. And what you build yourself cannot be revoked by a change of mood. I am not here to inspire you. Inspiration fades. I am here to dissect the mechanics. Most men do not collapse because they lack talent. They collapse because they misread the game. They assume the world is fair. They assume effort announces itself. They assume decency guarantees protection. Those are narratives designed to keep you compliant. Machiavelli studied a landscape of betrayals, conspiracies, and sudden collapses. He observed leaders rise in months and disappear in days. He watched loyalty convert into treason without warning. He concluded something uncomfortable. Human instincts do not upgrade with technology. Only the setting changes. The impulses remain. He described men as ungrateful, unstable, deceptive, fearful, and hungry for advantage. That is not bitterness. It is observation. If you feel offended, you are missing the function. The purpose is not to hate people. The purpose is to stop building your future on romantic assumptions about people. Listen carefully. This is not an argument for isolation as identity. Solitude is a phase, not a personality. The threat is not relationships. The threat is dependence. There is a difference between choosing allies and being owned by them. One expands you. The other confines you. The objective is not to walk alone forever. The objective is to construct yourself alone long enough to become formidable. Formidable men do not beg for seats. They negotiate terms. They are not waiting outside doors. They become the reason doors open. That is what it means to become wealthy without a network. Money is not the mission. Money is residue. It follows control. Control over your time. Control over your production. Control over your name. Control over your alternatives. When you grip those levers, income tracks behind you. Now we dismantle the first illusion. Networking is not sacred. Often it is an admission. When a man says he needs connections, what he often means is he cannot generate leverage independently. He is attempting to amplify himself through proximity. That may produce short bursts of momentum, but it embeds obligation. History warned about this repeatedly. Leaders who relied on hired armies or borrowed forces eventually paid for that reliance. Modern equivalents are borrowed credibility, borrowed audiences, borrowed validation. Here is the danger. The man who ushers you inside can escort you out. The man who presents you can define you. The man who elevates you can restrict you. Assistance is rarely neutral. It is an agreement rarely spoken aloud. And there is a reason for that. When you increase another man's power, you create a variable you must control. Power resents equals it cannot manage. If someone strengthens you, he must believe you remain within reach. If you outgrow his influence, you become a liability. So he will contain you, or he will remove you, or he will bind you with loyalty. That is why men dependent on networks remain agreeable. They edit themselves. They soften their edges. They cannot afford confrontation. Inclusion requires compliance. Now we cut into the second illusion. The modern culture glorifies safety. It teaches you to surround yourself with reassurance before you attempt risk. It sells security as virtue. But strategists never worship safety. They worship foundations. Strong institutions are built on two elements: capability and structure. Capability is the skill to win conflicts. Structure is the discipline to apply that skill consistently. Without capability, you are decorative. Without structure, you are erratic. A man ruled by impulse is easy to predict. And what is predictable is controllable. A network is not a base. It is an amplifier. It magnifies what you already are. If you are unskilled, it magnifies incompetence. If you lack evidence, it magnifies emptiness. This is why men who chase introductions before mastery often end up frustrated. They were promised access equals achievement. They gained access. Nothing materialized. Because they entered the room without substance. Deception spreads easily because it feeds immediate cravings. Men crave belonging. They crave validation. They crave relief from uncertainty. Networking simulates progress. It gives you conversation instead of competence. It gives you events instead of execution. It feels active. It is comfortable. But power does not reward comfort. Power rewards outcomes. And the metric is blunt. Results over intentions. You are not compensated for effort. You are compensated for impact. You are not respected for potential. You are respected for evidence. The world does not evaluate your heart. It evaluates signals. Signals of skill. Signals of reliability. Signals of force. If you currently stand without a network, that should sharpen your focus. It tells you precisely what to produce. Not popularity. Not approval. Signals. Proof. Tangible outcomes that function without you present. That is the beginning. Now we arrive at the hinge point, the pivot that determines whether you remain overlooked or become unavoidable. Two forces sit at the center of this. Virtu and Fortuna. Virtu is not about being morally pure or socially approved. It is force of character applied to reality. It is skill sharpened through friction. It is courage under uncertainty. It is the capacity to bend circumstances instead of being bent by them. Fortuna is the opposite pole. It is randomness. It is timing you did not choose. It is the sudden current that can carry you forward or pull you under without warning. Machiavelli does not instruct you to sit under the sky hoping for favorable weather. He makes it clear that chance governs a portion of life, but the rest is assigned to your command. Fortune may steer half the board. The other half is in your hands. If you lack connections, you cannot dictate who discovers you. You cannot script who gives you an introduction. You cannot choreograph who offers you an opening. That domain belongs to chance. But what you become before chance arrives belongs to you. The standard of your work. The rigor of your habits. The consistency of your production. The density of evidence you create. That is Virtu. And when Virtu is high, Fortuna loses its teeth. Luck shifts from oxygen to accessory. You stop needing it to survive and start using it when it appears. Machiavelli gives a principle that feels almost modern. The man who adjusts to the climate of his era thrives. So adjust. You do not need endless contacts. You need only leverage that functions while you sleep. That means mastering a craft that generates value on command. It means documented outcomes. It means distribution channels that display your capability without you begging for attention. That is how systems replace social dependence. Most men avoid this. They work in silence, hide their output, and then resent the absence of support. That is not oppression. That is obscurity. If no one can see your value, no one can select it. Not because the world is hostile, but because the world is distracted. Here is where ambition quietly suffocates. Men say they want influence, yet they avoid friction. They avoid exposure. They avoid the risk of visible failure. So they wait. Waiting feels safe. Waiting feels strategic. Waiting is decay. You do not need a crowd. You need a sequence. A disciplined progression that converts solitude into strength, and strength into chosen alliances. The first move is internal. Become the man whose output speaks without translation. Build capability that wins contests. Build structure that governs your impulses. Raise Virtu until Fortuna becomes a variable, not a verdict. Let us bring this down to the ground. I know the thought forming in your head. What does this look like on a random Monday when no one is watching and no one cares? Good. That question signals readiness. Step 1 is selecting a craft that produces observable impact. Not abstract intelligence. Not commentary. Impact. Something a market can measure without interpretation. Copy that generates sales. Editing that holds attention. Design that increases conversions. Code that deploys. Offers that close. Strategy that expands revenue. In every scenario, the craft is not your identity badge. It is your instrument. If your skill cannot be measured, you will live in endless arguments about taste and opinion. If it produces measurable shifts, you speak the dialect of power. Results. Here is the part most men resist. The craft is not your fantasy. It is your leverage. Your fantasy is what leverage purchases. Autonomy. Control over time. Negotiating power. The ability to decline what does not serve you. Step 2 is private sharpening. You refine your ability away from applause until your work is no longer brittle. Many rush into visibility starving for validation. They publish too soon, meet indifference, and label the system unfair. The system is not unfair. The system is indifferent. Build until your output carries weight. Then present it. This stage will test you because it offers no immediate reward. No likes. No praise. Just repetition and refinement. Silence is not condemnation. Silence is the baseline before evidence exists. If you cannot endure that baseline, you will become dependent on external noise to function. That is not drive. That is dependency. If you endure it, you become uncommon. You develop strength that is self-fueled. Then comes conversion. This is where competence becomes currency. Many believe that being skilled is sufficient. It is not. Skill is invisible until translated. Money is trust quantified. If no one understands what you can deliver, your ability remains theoretical. Theoretical value does not transact. So the third step is documentation. Evidence that your capability produced change in reality. Not slogans. Not aesthetic branding. Evidence. This is where you stop requesting belief and start presenting facts that make disbelief irrational. Consider how men assign respect. Not to the loudest promise, but to the clearest track record. That is why Machiavelli centers outcomes over intention. Not from bitterness, but from observation. People evaluate what happened, not what you meant. Receipts are portable outcomes. They communicate quickly to a stranger with no emotional attachment to you. They reduce perceived risk. Practically, there are 6 forms that work across industries. First, transformation. Before and after. A measurable shift you engineered. A campaign that doubled response. A funnel that moved from leaking to efficient. A brand that shifted from invisible to profitable. Make the contrast obvious. Second, metrics. Numbers cut through narrative. Revenue gained. Costs reduced. Retention improved. Time saved. Percentages matter because decision makers operate in reality. When you speak in metrics, you signal seriousness. Third, transparency of method. Show your thinking. Outline diagnosis. Explain the path from problem to resolution. Clients invest in cognition, not just execution. Fourth, speed evidence. Demonstrate timeline. Competence under constraint signals mastery. The market does not reward the hesitant. It rewards the reliable. When your results feel consistent and repeatable, you stop looking hopeful and start looking inevitable. Fifth, social validation, but handled with precision. Testimonials matter, but they are not the structure holding you up. They are garnish, not the meal. If praise from others is the only pillar under your reputation, then your credibility still belongs to someone else. Use endorsements as reinforcement, not as life support. They should confirm strength that is already visible, not attempt to replace it. Sixth, reduce risk in a way that signals control. Offer a guarantee when appropriate. Define revision terms. Clarify scope. Attach measurable deliverables to your agreements. When a buyer sees clear edges, his anxiety drops. Most men avoid this because they are afraid of being boxed in. But defined commitment is what creates authority. A man who cannot articulate what he will deliver is a gamble. And serious players do not gamble on vagueness. Notice something important. We have said nothing about collecting contacts. We have focused on becoming a safe investment. Safe to hire. Safe to pay. Safe to trust with responsibility. That is how wealth is built without leaning on introductions. You remove uncertainty so thoroughly that strangers select you without needing social permission. Now we move to the fourth phase. Deliberate visibility. This is where insecure men freeze because they confuse being seen with performing for approval. They imagine you must entertain to earn attention. That is weakness. Visibility is simply distribution of proof. Distribution is leverage. If no one can encounter your evidence, it cannot compound. If your evidence is accessible, it works on your behalf. It becomes a quiet recruiter. It becomes a silent negotiator. It opens doors without you knocking. You do not need applause. You need clarity. The right people must understand you quickly. Deliberate visibility means choosing a single channel where your market already pays attention and publishing documented results in a consistent rhythm. Not scattered inspiration. Documented results. Here is a structure aligned with how men evaluate value. One primary platform. Do not fragment your effort. Fragmentation is camouflage for fear. Identify where decision makers in your niche gather. If you serve founders, it may be LinkedIn or X. If you operate in creative industries, it may be YouTube or Instagram. If you are technical, perhaps GitHub paired with a focused blog. Start with 1. Then use 3 repeatable formats. Format 1 is the case breakdown. Present a real problem, your intervention, the measurable shift, and the lesson extracted. Keep it concrete. Format 2 is public analysis. Dissect a sales page. Audit a funnel. Evaluate a product. Reveal your reasoning process. Authority grows when thinking is visible. Format 3 is the framework. A checklist. A repeatable sequence. A decision tree. Men gravitate toward structure because structure reduces ambiguity. Ambiguity paralyzes action. Commit to publishing at least twice a week for 90 days. Do not bargain with this timeline. 90 days is sufficient to create signal. Short enough to remain sustainable. Most men stop after 3 weeks and blame the platform. They mistake their inconsistency for market rejection. There is a deeper mechanism at work. Consistent publication conditions the market to expect you. Expectation builds familiarity. Familiarity builds trust. Trust builds selection. The majority disappear. The one who remains becomes stable in the landscape. Stability becomes credibility. And understand this clearly. Deliberate visibility is not a popularity contest. Popularity fluctuates. Strategic visibility ensures that the right individuals can find and recall you. A large random audience is distraction. A small concentrated audience of qualified buyers is transformation. As you gain traction, another dynamic emerges. You will attract individuals who want proximity without contribution. The drifter. The opportunist. The man who hopes your momentum will carry him. This is where boundaries become non-negotiable. Influence draws interest. Interest attracts extraction attempts. A man without enforcement mechanisms becomes a resource to be consumed. Machiavelli articulated a principle modern ears resist but effective leaders recognize. If forced to choose, it is safer to be feared than loved. Love relies on obligation, and obligation dissolves when self-interest shifts. Fear, properly understood, means awareness of consequence. It means your limits are real. In professional contexts, consequence is not aggression. It is withdrawal. It is denied access. It is unanswered messages. It is exclusion from opportunity. It is the calm closing of a door. If you cannot enforce that, you will become socially approved and strategically ignored. People will praise you while draining you. Compliment you while delaying you. Call you ally while minimizing you. Now we enter the fifth phase. Selective alliances. This is where the architecture completes itself. You cultivated skill. You strengthened competence. You gathered documented proof. You established distribution. Now partnership becomes optional, not survival. That distinction changes everything. Networking says I require you to function. Alliance says our strengths combine for mutual gain. The earlier principle returns. Establish yourself on what you command, not what others command. When you approach collaboration from stability, you maintain leverage. When you approach from deficiency, you surrender it. Need distorts judgment. Need tolerates disrespect. Need signs unfavorable contracts. Need silences truth. So adopt this filter. Only collaborate when you can disengage without damage. Only accept support when you could proceed independently. Only enter rooms where your contribution elevates the room. You will know you are prepared for alliances when 3 answers are immediate. First, can you describe your offer in one precise sentence and state the measurable result it produces? Second, can you present reliable proof that this result occurs consistently? Third, have you defined boundaries that protect your time, standards, and pricing? If those answers are unclear, you are not prepared for partnership. You are positioned for dependence. And dependence always arrives wearing invisible restraints. Now we need to confront the part you rarely admit out loud, the emotional engine underneath your frustration. It is not just that you lack connections. It is that you feel excluded. You feel as if the real game is happening in rooms you were never invited into. You watch other men move forward and you assume they were handed a private map. You start to believe you showed up late, that the race already started without you. That emotion is not harmless. It corrodes judgment. It pushes you toward urgency without clarity. And urgency without clarity leads to self-sabotage. When a man feels behind, he reaches for acceleration. He grabs at shortcuts. He attaches himself to anyone who appears established. He signs agreements that feel like progress just to escape the sting of standing still. Machiavelli understood this weakness long before social media existed. He saw leaders collapse not only because of rivals, but because of their own lack of restraint. Impatience makes men predictable. Predictable men are easy to manipulate. So this is where discipline becomes power. The foundations of any strong state, he wrote, are sound laws and strong arms. Translate that into your life. Sound laws mean personal code. Standards you do not violate when you are tired. A schedule you follow when motivation disappears. A refusal to negotiate with excuses. Strong arms mean skill that produces outcomes. Ability that wins measurable contests. Evidence that shuts down doubt without argument. When those two elements are in place, you do not need to beg for inclusion. You build your own platform. And when others join you, it is because your structure supports them, not because you entertain them. Let me ground this in something tangible. Theory is clean. Reality is messy. Imagine you are a video editor. No big clients. No famous friends. Just raw ability and zero visibility. Instead of saying, I edit everything for everyone, you narrow your target. You say, I help long-form creators increase audience retention so they can sell more effectively. That is specific. That is measurable. Then you sharpen privately. You take public videos from creators in that niche and you rework them on your own time. You compress the opening to eliminate drag. You introduce tension earlier. You restructure the middle to prevent drop-off. You design pacing that keeps attention alive. You are not waiting for permission. You are building assets. Then you create documentation. You show the original cut beside your version. You explain the reasoning behind each change. You reference retention psychology. You outline expected improvements. No exaggeration. Just structured thinking and visible craft. Then you distribute. Twice a week you break down a creator's hook and explain how to strengthen it. Once a week you present one of your speculative edits as a case example. You repeat this for 90 days. No drama. No emotional posts about the grind. Just proof. What happens is predictable. The right creators begin to recognize your pattern of thought. They see blind spots you consistently identify. Your content filters the audience. It repels those who want cheap work and attracts those who value precision. Eventually messages arrive. Not because you chased them, but because your evidence lowered their risk. When that happens, structure protects you. You define deliverables. You set revision limits. You clarify timelines and payment terms. You do not apologize for standards. You do not undercut yourself out of fear. Because you are not operating from scarcity. You have proof. You have process. You have momentum. That is what it means to build wealth without leaning on a social ladder. Not fantasy wealth. Controlled wealth. The kind that does not disappear when someone withdraws approval. As growth begins, a different challenge appears. Identity strain. Many men sabotage progress at this stage. Some inflate with ego and abandon discipline. Others shrink back into invisibility because attention feels dangerous. This is why adaptation matters. When circumstances shift, your behavior must adjust. When you are unknown, your mission is evidence. When you gain visibility, your mission is consistency. When you gain respect, your mission is selection. Selection means restraint. It means declining projects that dilute your positioning. It means protecting focus. Because power is not only acquisition. It is preservation. And that brings us to reputation. Reputation is leverage stored in the minds of others. You cannot fully control it, but you can influence it through repeated action. Being perceived as capable is not vanity. It is armor. It discourages exploitation. It reduces frivolous challenges. It signals that crossing you carries consequence. But perception must align with substance. If you attempt to project strength without continued competence, you become fragile. And fragile men get exposed quickly. So even when your calendar fills, you continue documenting wins. Even when money flows, you keep refining skill. Markets are restless. Attention resets. If you disappear, you are replaced. Quietly. So remain visible without pleading. Remain consistent without arrogance. Let me compress the entire framework so it is burned into memory. Choose a craft tied to measurable results. Sharpen it privately until your output carries weight. Turn your competence into documented proof that speaks without you. Distribute that proof in a controlled, repeatable pattern. Form alliances only when you can walk away without damage. Guard your time and standards with clear boundaries. If you execute this sequence, your thinking changes. You stop seeing yourself as excluded. You start seeing yourself as constructing leverage. And here is the pivot you must internalize. The world does not compensate goodness. It compensates certainty. Certainty comes from undeniable evidence. When your results remove hesitation, negotiation shrinks. That is why solitude is not a curse. Solitude is the forge. It is where you build strength without distraction. It is where your standards are formed without compromise. It is where your competence matures before exposure. When the world finally evaluates you, persuasion is unnecessary. The record speaks. Accept this without bitterness. You are not entitled to opportunity. You are not guaranteed access. That reality is not cruel. It is liberating. Because if nothing is guaranteed, then everything you earn is solid. Owned. Not borrowed. Not gifted. Built. So decide who you will be. The man waiting for an invitation. Or the man who constructs value so clearly that invitations arrive unasked. If this sharpened your perspective, subscribe. I am not building an audience of spectators. I am building an audience of men who execute.